Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame induction ceremony honoring our nation's space heroes. Please rise for the presentation of colors by Boy Scout Troop 369 from Merritt Island, Florida, followed by the National Anthem performed by Jennifer Harris.
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Chief Operating Officer of Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, Mr. William Moore.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Jennifer, thank you very much for that wonderful rendition of our national anthem. On behalf of Delaware North Company's employees worldwide, and certainly here all of our crew members here at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, I would like to welcome all of you to today's induction ceremony celebrating our 10th class of Space Shuttle astronauts into the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame. It is always a privilege to host the induction ceremony and be part of this momentous occasion that honors leaders in spaceflight and community who are truly deserving of both our recognition and our respect. There is no better place on this earth to host this celebration than at the Kennedy Space Center. A truly special place where you can witness history and history in the making, as you might have seen this afternoon just before the induction with the launch of an Atlas V. Susan, nice job pulling that off on time today. As we prepare for the upcoming launches of Space Shuttles Endeavour and Atlantis on their final missions to the International Space Station, we reflect back on more than 30 years of Space Shuttle program and the legacy that these astronauts have left on U.S. space exploration. The Kennedy Space Center complex is honored that Atlantis will be coming home and will stay here to be honored for years to come. We look forward to sharing the legacy of the astronauts. Thank you. We look forward to sharing the legacy of these astronauts, the story of the Space Shuttle, and most importantly, the thousands who have worked tirelessly to make this remarkable program successful. I would like to take just a moment to acknowledge a few people in our audience with us today. Very proud to have the NASA Administrator, Charles Bolden, here with us. our very own Kennedy Space Center Director, Robert Cabana. And they will both join us shortly, along with the Hall of Fame astronauts. We also have astronauts John McBride, Susan Calrain, Don McMungle, and Don, I'm working on your name there, who are also in the audience today. I would also like to thank you. I would like to recognize the really significant contribution to today's ceremony by the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. Their board of directors, including incoming chairman Charlie Duke, and their executive director, Lynn LeBlanc. Charlie, Lynn, thank you both very much. And now it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage today's master of the ceremony. He is CNN's Miami correspondent, responsible for all of CNN's coverage of news in Florida and the Caribbean. Since joining CNN in 1983, he has covered every major hurricane to hit Florida and the Gulf Coast. He is also CNN's principal correspondent for the coverage of the U.S. space program, having covered events such as John Glenn's 1998 return to space flight, the Mars Pathfinder mission, and the 2005 return to flight mission, along with numerous other space shuttle launches. He has won 2 Emmy Awards and has been honored numerous times for his reporting contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage John Zarrella.
Thank you, Bill. And ladies and gentlemen, we really owe Bill and his team here a resounding applause for the work that they did in order to bring Atlantis here. And in just a couple of years, where's the building going to be? That way, right? I'm turned around. And it'll be a spectacular facility. And I know all of you will want to be here to see Atlantis when it is on permanent display here. So thanks, Bill, and good afternoon. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to be here once again for the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame induction ceremony. It is truly an honor to be here and surrounded by so many of the great space heroes. Again, as Bill mentioned, only 2 flights left. And I recall not that long ago sitting in Houston and interviewing Alvin Drew, who was a mission specialist on the final flight of the Space Shuttle Discovery. And we're talking, and Alvin says, he says, you know, 100 years from now, conspiracy theorists are going to be out there, and they're going to say, there's no way they flew a space shuttle, a lifting body that could launch satellites, that you could launch and repair the Hubble Space Telescope. You could build an international space station. No way they could have done that. And then, on top of that, return to Earth and then fly again. It just isn't possible. And I talked to Steve Lindsey out there as well, who was the commander for the Discovery flight, and we were talking about, you know, how do you feel about all this? He said, you know, this is really a time not to be sad, but a time to celebrate the wonderful accomplishments of 30 years of flying space shuttles. And when you celebrate the accomplishments, you're celebrating the engineers and the scientists and the technicians and, of course, the astronauts who flew these marvelous lifting bodies. And it is because on their shoulders the future is going to be built, the United States space program. And now it is my privilege to introduce to you the attending members of the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. A founder of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, he is one of America's original 7 astronauts. He has the distinction of being the first human to conduct missions in both outer and inner space. He flew the second American orbital flight, piloting his spacecraft through 3 revolutions of the Earth. Later, he participated in the Navy's Man in the Sea project as an aquanaut in the Sea Lab 2 program. Scott Carpenter. Selected as an astronaut by NASA in 1963, he made his first space flight as pilot on the three-day Gemini 11 mission, during which he left the spacecraft for a 44-minute spacewalk. In November 1969, he circled 60 miles above the moon while his Apollo 12 crewmates walked on its surface. He retired from NASA in 1972 to become executive vice president of the New Orleans Saints professional football team. Dick Gordon. He served as lunar module pilot aboard the first manned mission of the Apollo 7 program. He later served as chief of the Skylab branch of the Flight Crew Directorate, overseeing components of the United States' first space station. Today, he shares his thoughts on spaceflight through periodic columns, lectures, and his book, The All-American Boys. Walt Cunningham. He was selected by NASA for its 5th class of astronauts in April 1966. In 1970, he was a member of the Apollo 13 crew that struggled to return to Earth after an oxygen tank explosion aborted the mission as it approached the moon. He later commanded the Space Shuttle Enterprise on its approach and landing test flights. Fred Hayes. He was the 6th person to step foot on the moon during Apollo 14, NASA's 3rd moon landing. He and the late Alan Shepard explored the moon's hilly Framora region in 1971 on the first mission devoted to lunar science. They established the record for the longest foot traverse, exceeding 4 kilometers. He retired from NASA and founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences in an effort to integrate scientific disciplines into the study of human consciousness. He was a 2005 nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize. Edgar Mitchell. He served as command module pilot on the 1971 Apollo 15 moon mission, during which he orbited the moon while his crewmates explored the surface. On the homeward journey, he took the farthest out spacewalk, 200,000 miles from Earth, moving along handrails on the outside of Endeavour to retrieve film canisters from the 2 moon mapping cameras. Al Warden. He became the 10th person to walk on the moon aboard Apollo 16 in 1972. During 3 excursions over 3 days, he and fellow astronaut John Young drove a lunar rover 16 miles and collected 213 pounds of lunar rocks and soil. Today, he is president of Charlie Duke Enterprises and is an active speaker. Charlie Duke. He worked for 59 days in orbit as a member of the 2nd Skylab station crew in 1973. In 1982, he commanded the 3rd orbital test flight of Space Shuttle Columbia, the only mission to land at White Sands, New Mexico. He retired from NASA and the Marine Corps as a colonel in 1984. Jack Lausma. He lived in space for 59 days aboard the Skylab space station in 1973, during which he conducted 3 spacewalks to exchange film and direct a sun shield to cool the orbiting laboratory. 10 years later, he returned to space aboard Columbia on the first flight of the Space Lab laboratory. Currently, he is an adjunct professor at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Owen Garriott. He piloted the maiden flight of the Space Shuttle program on the orbiter Columbia in 1981. He then commanded 3 additional shuttle missions, including the first mission to capture, repair, and release a satellite. In the early 1990s, he served as director of NASA's Kennedy Space Center and later served as president of Thiokol Aerospace Group in Utah. Bob Crippen. He piloted the 4th and final test flight of Space Shuttle Columbia before commanding Discovery on its maiden voyage in 1984. His last assignment was the first planned and controlled mission by a foreign customer and the first to fly 8 crew members. He later served as vice president for Raytheon Aerospace Engineering, Hank Hartsfield. He flew to space twice on missions STS-5 and STS-51A. His rookie flight, the shuttle's first orbiting mission, deployed 2 satellites. His second mission featured the world's first space salvage. Using a jet backpack, he and his crewmate, Dale Gardner, captured 2 malfunctioning satellites. After leaving NASA in 1985, he served as Chief Executive Officer of Space Industries International and later was chairman of Viridian Corp until he retired in 2004. Joe Allen. A 3-flight veteran, he and fellow crew member Bob Crippen were the first to fly an orbiter in close proximity to a free-flying satellite on STS-7. He went on to command the return-to-flight mission after Challenger was lost. He left NASA in 1989 and later became president and CEO of AXA Space in Maryland. Rick Houck. He flew 3 shuttle missions. He served as pilot of STS-51C and commander of STS-31, during which the crew successfully deployed the Hubble Space Telescope. He went on to command STS-46, deploying the European retrievable carrier Eureka and the Italian tethered satellite. From 1997 to 2000, he held the position of Deputy Director of NASA's Kennedy Space Center, recently retired as Vice President of Engineering and Integration and Chief Technology Officer at United Space Alliance, Lauren Shriver. He is a veteran of 5 shuttle missions and the first astronaut to log 1,000 hours on the shuttle. He made NASA's first unplanned spacewalk and performed 3 spacewalks during the first Hubble Space Telescope rescue repair mission. He is currently a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Jeff Hoffman. His first mission aboard Space Shuttle Columbia was the last to fly before the Challenger accident in 1986. He later piloted Space Shuttle Discovery on the 5-day STS-31 mission to deploy the Hubble Space Telescope. He flew twice more into space, logging more than 680 hours in orbit. Today he serves as the NASA Administrator, Charles Bolden. He is a 4-flight veteran piloting his first 2 space shuttle missions. Later, he commanded STS-65, during which he and his crew set a record for the longest space shuttle mission at that time, and STS-88, the first space station assembly mission. He is currently the center director right here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, Robert Cabana. Ladies and gentlemen, our Hall of Fame astronauts. And now I'd like to welcome to the podium Hall of Fame astronaut and Kennedy Space Center Director, Mr. Robert Cabana.
Thanks, John. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Kennedy Space Center for today's Hall of Fame induction ceremony. What a great weekend this has been, starting out last Thursday with the 50th anniversary celebration of the first American to fly in space, Alan Shepard, a Hall of Fame astronaut and the founder of what has become the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. Although that first flight only lasted 15 minutes and went to an altitude of 116 miles, it opened the door to space for the United States, and we've been charging ahead ever since. Today's inductees, Bow Bobko and Susan Helms, carry on that pioneering spirit of Alan Shepard. They have careers that span our nation's space program, from what was the military orbiting laboratory program back in the 60s to long-duration space flights aboard the International Space Station in 2001. They're both extremely deserving of this honor, and it's a real pleasure for me to be able to participate in it. A few weeks ago, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the first flight of the space shuttle. the shuttle has been a phenomenal vehicle. It's enabled us to learn how to actually live and work in space. And it made it possible for us to build the International Space Station that's been permanently manned since October of 2000. Just as we transitioned from Apollo to shuttle, NASA and the Kennedy Space Center are in a time of transition now. As we move from shuttle to support a more diverse national space program that includes commercial access to space and a space launch system and multi-purpose crew vehicle that will once again enable us to explore beyond the bounds of our home planet. Space exploration is challenging, but I know that we will be successful because of the outstanding team at NASA and here at the Kennedy Space Center that every day make the impossible seem ordinary. Thank you so much for your support. Once again, welcome to the Kennedy Space Center, and once again, congratulations to our inductees. Thank you.
Thanks again, Bob. Now, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, Hall of Fame astronaut, and I told him I'd shill for him a little bit here. He's got a book coming out called Falling to Earth, July 26th, and better than some of the places I've seen you falling. Just kidding. Colonel Al Warden.
Thanks, John. I'm not really sure I want you shilling for me, fella. We got to do this the right way. Anyway, let me add my welcome to what Bob has said, what John has said. It's really a great day. Let me tell you, it's about 10 degrees cooler than it was last year, and there's a nice little breeze blowing, so this is really wonderful today. I want to tell you a little bit about the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, which has been running strong for over 25 years. It was founded in 1984 by the original 7 Mercury astronauts. Now, Al Shepard was the first guy to fly at space, and he was also, if I'm not mistaken, the spark plug that started the Mercury 7 Foundation, which kind of morphed into the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation as we know it today. The goal of the foundation is to help the United States retain its world leadership in science and technology to the top college students in the country. In the beginning, the original 7 guys gave each of the scholars, they gave 7 scholars $1,000 each. We give a lot more than that today. Actually, before I go on, we're really proud to have one of the original founders with us here today, and I'd like Scott Carpenter to stand up and take a bow, please. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for all you've done. Thank you for your great support of the foundation. Okay, today, over 80 astronauts from every U.S. space program have joined our effort. The foundation now disperses 26 $10,000 scholarships annually and has awarded over $3 million in scholarships totally since its inception. These scholarships are, in fact, the largest monetary award given in the United States to science and technology and engineering students in the undergraduate level based solely on merit. We do not consider need. We're trying to get the best and the brightest, regardless of where they come from, into the program. So this is something we're really very, very proud of. Not only does the foundation provide scholarships, but we promote the importance of science, technology, and space exploration wherever we can. One way we do this is by serving as a consultant to NASA and Kennedy Space Center Visitor Center Complex to the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame, where we supervise the selection process of new astronauts for induction, and we closely work with the Hall of Fame astronauts to provide personal artifacts for public display in the Hall of Fame. To do so, we put together an outside committee of Hall of Fame astronauts, aerospace journalists, authors, and retired NASA and industry personnel, many of who are with us today. Would those who are on the induction selection committee please stand and take a bow? Hugh, Jack, I know all you guys. Rob, we have a few. Unfortunately, the chairman of that committee can't be with us today. Bob Seek puts that committee together for us every year. Bob's not here, is he? I don't think. Because I tell you what Bob's doing today. He's up at Daytona racing in the Paul Whitman Trophy race up there in his little Mazda, which goes 140 miles an hour. So Bob's still running fast, right? He's really doing well. Now, as most of you know, last night we had a wonderful time to celebrate the new inductees. It was a great night. But the evening wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for the support of our sponsors. And I want to list just a few of them for you. I'd like to take a moment to thank our friends at NASA, Charlie Bolden and Bob Cabana, I should say General and Colonel, whatever. Thank you, sir. Bill Moore from Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. Bill, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. Your partnership is really invaluable to us. I also want to thank our top induction sponsors, the Courtyard by Marriott in Cocoa Beach, the Boeing Company, Lockheed Martin, James Long, Omega Swatch Group, Science Applications International Corporation, and all the others who supported this event today. Now, I guess, I'm going to shill for John a little bit. Let me hand you over to the great, the one and only CNN reporter, John Zarrella.
He already told me I wasn't getting a free copy of the book either. I have to tell you, just for all of those of you out there, you're here today, but you weren't able to be obviously at the event last night, many of you. These scholarship recipients, they make this country proud. You have no idea. I have absolutely, when they were listing off the things that they're doing in their research, their studies, I'm like, huh? I said, oh, now I know why I'm a journalist. I mean, they're brilliant, and the future of our nation is in good hands with them, let me tell you right now. But if it weren't for the Scholarship Foundation and what they do, a lot of what they're doing would not be possible. So remember these gentlemen and everybody on the foundation, because they do absolutely outstanding work. And the time has arrived, the induction of the 10th class of Space Shuttle astronauts into the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. They will be introduced in the order in which they flew into space. Our first inductee is Karol Bow Bobko. During his 19 years in the astronaut program, Colonel Bobko flew on 3 space shuttle missions and logged more than 386 hours in space. Bow served as pilot during the first voyage of Space Shuttle Challenger aboard STS-6, during which the crew conducted the first Space Shuttle spacewalks. In April 1985, Bow served as the commander of STS-51D. After 7 days in space, he successfully landed Space Shuttle Discovery in spite of a blown main landing gear tire. In October '85, he flew on STS-51J, the first flight of the shuttle Atlantis, and the second Department of Defense mission for the Space Shuttle program. Bow retired from NASA and the United States Air Force in 1988. Currently, he serves as president of the United States chapter of the Association of Space Explorers. Now let's take a look at a few video highlights from his stunning career.
3, 2, engine sequence start. 1, 0, launch commit. We have a liftoff. All engines building up thrust. Moving out.
It's been a very rewarding experience.
Roger, it's Moscow's turn to ask the questions that have been proposed by the press there.
Thank you, Bo.
Насколько считаете?
Have these 2 flight spotters made up, and this is the original flight spotter.
orbiter joins the shuttle fleet, and it has cleared the tower.
Touchdown main gear.
Ladies and gentlemen, astronaut Bow Bobko. And now to present Bow Bobko for induction into the United States Hall of Fame, please welcome Hall of Fame astronaut Jeff Hoffman.
Well, I am absolutely delighted and honored to be able to introduce my first mission commander and my good friend, Karol J. Bobko, or as we all know him, Bow. Now, you'll hear him talk in a little while, and you may not be able to tell it from his accent, but Bow was actually born in New York City. And so, like myself, he is a genuine Apple astronaut. I did a little research into his childhood in preparation for these remarks, and I found an amazing fact. During all of his youth, his mother never once called him Bow. She called him Karol, which is a good Polish name, and I actually will jump ahead in time a little bit to tell another story about Karol Józef Bobko's Polish heritage. This was actually the first time that I specifically became aware of Bow as a distinct personality in the astronaut office. It was in October 1978, right after Karol Józef Wojtyła was elected Pope, and a sign appeared on Bow's office door proclaiming in very large letters that from henceforth it would be considered a mortal sin to tell Polish jokes. And I hope that this story I've just told doesn't count as a Polish joke. And I never heard any Polish jokes after that in the astronaut office. Well, Bow was fascinated by the space program and expressed a desire to be an astronaut from a very early age, as I did, actually, although we differed in our attitude towards airplanes. For me, airplanes didn't go fast enough or high enough. I just dreamt about rockets. But for Bow, airplanes seemed like the best route to space, and so he enrolled in and graduated in the first class of the then new Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. An unexpected life-altering side effect of this decision was his proximity to Denver, which led to his meeting and eventually marrying Diane, a happy marriage which is still thriving, full of music, full of love, and which has led to two wonderful children, Paul and Michelle. Michelle and Paul both talk of how Bow always shared his experiences with his whole family. He wanted them to enjoy as much as he did some of the pleasures that he was having while training and flying. Diane knew from day one that Bow someday wanted to fly in space, and she supported him all the way. And sure enough, after 6 years of active duty in fighter squadrons, he made his way to Edwards. And that was great timing because that's just when the Air Force was selecting astronauts for their manned orbiting laboratory program, and Bow was selected in the second group of mole astronauts, becoming the first Air Force Academy graduate to be selected as an astronaut. But MOL never flew, never made it to orbit, so Bow and his MOL cohort came to NASA at the peak of the Apollo program. The problem was NASA wasn't quite sure what to do with Bow, so for safekeeping, they decided to lock him up in a tin can for a month. Now, NASA officials assure us that this was not as a punishment for anything he had done. Rather, it was to see how he, Bob Crippen, and Bill Thornton would make out in a simulated Skylab mission known as SMEET. Actually, the Russians are still doing this, only they lock people up for 500 days instead of just a month. So I suspect that Bow is probably happy that he was born in New York and not in Moscow. But it turns out that Moscow was actually next on Bow's dance card as support crew for Apollo-Soyuz. And the Russians taught him a lot about survival tactics, how to make it through evening after evening of vodka toasts and then be ready for action the following morning. Well, he survived and finally did get assigned to his first space flight, as you heard, as pilot of STS-6, the maiden voyage of Challenger. thus becoming the first Air Force Academy graduate not only to be selected as astronaut, but actually to fly in space, fulfilling his long-held dream. And following that, he was named as a commander of a flight which originally was supposed to go in June of 1984, leading a team of 4 rookies, Don Williams, Dave Griggs, Ray Seddon, and myself. And I'm really sure that the hardest part of this command for Bow was being outnumbered by 2 Navy pilots who, early in training, presented him with a book of naval traditions and regulations and regularly quizzed him on it to make sure that he was learning. I have to say he was a good sport. Well, those were the days of mission delays, cancellations, of crews being reassigned to different payloads, getting different shuttles, and we experienced this in spades. Frankly, the story of how our crew progressed through 4 different flight assignments, bounced back and forth between 2 orbiters, acquired 3 different payload specialists would take much too long. I'll just say that by the time we finally launched on April 12th of 1985, and by the way, I'll remind you, April 12th is not just the anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's flight and of John Young's and Bob Crippen's flight on Columbia. That was the auspicious day when Bow led us into space. Anyway, by the time we finally launched, we had sent out 26 different letters to our launch guests, updating them about when and with what orbiter and on what mission we might finally fly. Well, we have an engineering leadership program at MIT, and I often use Bow as an example of good leadership when I give lessons to my students. Let me give you an example. One of the more difficult times in our training was after the pad abort of June of 1984, and that led to the consolidation of the June and August commercial satellite payloads. By that time, we had slipped to the August flight. But they scrubbed the Spartan satellite, which we had been planning to deploy and rendezvous with and retrieved, and they scrubbed us as well, reassigning us to an IUS TDRS deployment the following January, which was a pretty long wait and a big blow, particularly for those of us who hadn't flown before. And here's where Bow's personal qualities as a leader really came into play, because as I said, we were kind of demoralized at that point. And what was Bow's response? Hey guys, let's party. And that's typical of Bow. Not that he's a party animal, not exactly, not for those of them who know him well. No, the point is, Bow loved space flight. He wanted everyone working with him to enjoy it as much as he did, and he knew from experience that despite delays, a first flight is worth waiting for, and he did everything he could to help our morale. He enjoyed flying so much, his family has told me they could actually judge how close he was getting to a flight because the smile on his face kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So anyway, in April of 1985, we were finally ready to go on STS-51D, and it turned out to be a pretty exciting flight with many unexpected events. And I just want to describe 2 of them, which will allow me to tell you a little bit about what it was like working with Bow as a commander. Bow is cool under pressure, and I saw this on numerous occasions, the first of which was right after main engine cutoff. We had been asked to try a new way of dumping the residual hydrogen through the fill and drain valve, which could potentially do a dump faster than using the normal techniques. And for any of the PLTs here, I hope I got that right. Main engines were never my specialty, but I try. Anyway, right after ET separation, Don Williams opened the valves, which caused a huge roll moment because the dump didn't go through the CG. Through discovery, about 90 degrees out of attitude, led to almost constant firing of our attitude control jets, and people who have experienced these know how loud they are. I mean, I was a rookie down on the middeck, and I thought I was in the middle of an artillery barrage down there. Don's voice from up on the flight deck seemed about an octave higher as he asked Bow quickly, "Should we shut the valves?" Bow just said, perfectly calmly, "No, let's leave them open and see what happens." Well, of course, we survived, and I think we succeeded in demonstrating that this was maybe not an optimum technique for dumping the hydrogen. Now, our mission, as planned, was pretty simple. We were going to deploy 2 satellites, do a few medical experiments, and come home after 4 days. I don't know, Bow, you may have some special karma about satellites. I mean, the first IUS TDRS, which you guys deployed on your first flight, didn't get to the proper orbit. The second TDRS that was going to be launched which would have been the third of our assigned flights the previous January, had a problem. It was still on the ground. And now, even though our first satellite worked okay, we deployed the second satellite and it never turned on. So I don't know. But it sure turned out to be a lot of fun, because Mission Control came up with a really neat plan by which we would manufacture some special tools resembling fly swatters, after which Bow became known as the leader of NASA's SWAT team. Then we would do an EVA, a spacewalk, to attach them to the remote manipulator arm, and then finally rendezvous with the SYNCOM satellite to flick a possibly malfunctioning switch on this spinning satellite. Now, the problem was that NASA had never before done a completely unplanned EVA. The arm had never been used for anything remotely like this. And most important, it had been 10 months since we had ever done any rendezvous practice. I mean, we didn't even have a rendezvous checklist on board. And so they had to transcribe the entire checklist, send it up to us by teleprinter. We ended up with a 20-foot long yellow rendezvous scroll, basically, which Bow and Don Williams had to cut up into page-sized pieces and paste into our post-insertion checklist. And I still treasure the image of Bow and Don pasting together this checklist. And of course, I also cherish the memory of Bow helping me into my spacesuit. So it was quite an adventure, and it was nearing the final phases of rendezvous when Bow taught me another lesson in leadership. I was helping Bow and Don as the rendezvous navigator. Back in those days, things were a bit more primitive than they are now, and one of the primary ways in which we determined how far away a satellite was to measure the size of the satellite on the TV screen, and that was my job. But I have to admit that when we saw this huge satellite floating motionless outside the shuttle, I mean, I had never imagined anything like this, and I got sort of lost in a state of reverie when all of a sudden I heard a soft voice calmly asking, "I can't understand why nobody is giving me range calls." I mean, no shouting, no panic, no nasty language, just the cool voice of authority that brought me back. That's the way to lead, and we all appreciate it. And that's the image of Bow that I'll never forget. Because, I mean, there we were, doing something we had never anticipated, for which our last training was almost a year out of date, and yet Bow was calmly looking out the window, flying Discovery with great skill, as though we had rehearsed this many, many times, and keeping a cool head throughout. Well, Bow had one more flight after 51D, but it was a military flight, so I can't tell you a whole lot about it, other than that it was the maiden voyage of Atlantis, which made it the second inaugural shuttle flight that Bow was on. And that was his final shuttle flight. Diane tells me that one of the saddest days of Bow's life was when he had to clean out his flight locker at Ellington, because Bow so loved to fly, and of course it's hard to say goodbye. But Bow has continued to serve the space program, both in Houston and now in California, where he's in charge of the simulators at NASA Ames. Flying simulators may not be as exciting as flying airplanes or space shuttles, but Bow loves technical challenges, and he continues to be a fine team leader and a fine person. Bow, we are truly delighted to welcome you to the Astronaut Hall of Fame. Congratulations.
And now for the presentation of the Hall of Fame medal.
Thank you, Jeff, I think. The 50th anniversary of human spaceflight has caused me to look back on my own career in aerospace. It's been about 50 years. When the first satellite was launched, I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, and my instructor said, "It's not going to be very long before people start to fly in space." It was at that time that I decided I wanted to be one of those space explorers. When the first man did fly, I was finishing my training and just entering the Operational Air Force as a fighter pilot. My wife says that whenever I had a chance, I selected the path towards getting into space. In those days, the Air Force was anxious to get people in space. They even called the test pilot school the Aerospace Research Pilot School. It was not long before the Air Force had hopes of flying Dinosaur and then the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, as Jeff has already spoken to you about. I was selected as one of those MOL crew members until the program was canceled. Fortunately, 7 of us MOL people were picked up by NASA as astronauts. Of course, there were times it didn't seem that joining NASA was fortunate because they were canceling Apollo program flights, they were canceling Skylab flights, and the shuttle kept moving to the right. The closest I got to flight in those early days was the Skylab medical experiment, which you've already heard about. The only difference is it was 2 months, not just 1 month. I can remember Bill Thornton, who was a medical doctor, calling out to our flight surgeon, who was outside, and telling him how he was noting strange behavior. Bill ticked off a list of items you could hear the flight surgeon get more and more excited. Finally, the flight surgeon couldn't stand it anymore and asked Bill, "Okay, tell me, which one of the crew is having the problems?" The answer was, it wasn't inside SMEAT, it was the management committee on the outside. I also worked with the Russians, as Jeff mentioned. I remember this was at the height of the Cold War. I can remember walking across Red Square one night with Bob Overmeyer, and he said, "You know, Bo, I never doubted I'd be here. I just thought it would be at 200 feet and full afterburner." The job that did require some flying was the shuttle approach and landing tests. Bob Overmeyer and I alternated between being Capcom and the prime shuttle chase. Being next to the shuttle as it flew off of the top of the 747 really was quite a sight. And being with Engel and Truly as they prepared for flight was quite an experience. As an example, they had china and candelabra, not paper plates and plastic forks, on their breakfast table before the flights. Between these various tasks I have described, I worked on space shuttle development, especially on approach and landing, rollout, and autoland. That autoland development experience probably was partially responsible for our crew getting the detailed test objective of flying the autoland. Our motto was Spectre Mater Nullus Manus, which means look ma, no hands. I don't know whether it was fortunate or not, but that DTO was canceled, and so we never did the autoland. One day, John Young came to my office, and he pulled on my sleeve and said he would like me to take a small group of folks and go to KSC to help them get Columbia ready for flight. We would work with the Countdown Working Group, help decide what testing should be performed, and then participate in the testing, serve as the liaison between the astronaut office and the shuttle activities that were taking place at the Cape, and do whatever was necessary to be done down there. John said there would probably be quite a bit of travel for a couple of months. Actually, there was quite a bit of travel for a couple of years when they were trying to get Columbia ready to flight. When Columbia flew from Palmdale to KSC, quite a few of the tiles came off. That meant all the tiles were questionable and needed to be tested. It was a year before they were pasting more tiles back on the shuttle before they were taking tiles off of the shuttle. But it wasn't only the tiles. The first time Columbia was powered up, I gave Dick Scobie the honor of being in the cockpit for the power-up. Dick was there for the call to stations at 8 a.m. The test started a little later, and he was still there when I came to relieve him the next morning at 6 a.m. The problem was I couldn't get Dick out of the cockpit until he had thrown at least one switch. We had a lot to learn in those days. The tiles were just the item that was taking the blame. I made a graph which showed how long it would be to launch. And as we progressed through time, the time to launch kept getting longer. And, you know, I I could hardly understand it. I thought I was a cosine wave in a sine wave world, just out of phase with everything that was going on. Finally, after 13 years, there were my 3 flights. I won't try to describe space flight to this group, since you are one of the few groups in the world who really understand what it means. My first flight was exciting for me, since space was a new environment and there were so many new items to see and do. The second flight was challenging, since we were asked to perform an unplanned DVA, rendezvous, and activities with the robot arm, which Jeff has already told you about. My third flight was enjoyable, since by then I was familiar with flying the shuttle and was an experienced commander. I could tell you more about exactly what happened on that flight, but then I'd have to shoot you since it was a military flight. And of course, all space flight is beautiful and inspiring. It all didn't end with my last space flight. I was in my office one day when P.J. Whites, the commander of my first flight, called me on the phone and said, "Bo, we are going to open a new TAL site," which is transatlantic abort site, "for the coming mission." I said to him, "PJ, tell me who's going, when is he going, and how long will he stay?" His answer was, "You, tomorrow, and I don't know." That started me looking at emergency sites over Africa and equipping all the shuttle landing sites with the right equipment. After I left NASA and the Air Force and joined the aerospace industry, I have been working with the shuttle and station programs for quite a few years. I still have an enjoyable job. Again, as Jeff mentioned, I am the program manager for the contract which maintains and operates the research simulators at the NASA Ames Research Center. We have had simulations of rendezvous and docking, lunar landing and entry in the space arena, and lots of aircraft and air traffic control simulations. When I was recalling the things that I have done, I also recalled the people I worked with, the people who had helped me along the way, and the people I looked up to. With me, that started with an 8th grade teacher who helped me get into a good technical high school. She and her husband offered to let me live with them so that I would be in a proper school district. But that was just a start. Many of the people in this audience helped me along the way. Your help and encouragement have been instrumental in my standing here today to receive the honor of being inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame. I decided I wouldn't read off a long list of names, but I must add one. And that's my wife, Diana, 50 years, who followed and supported me. She has followed me and supported me through all this, even before we were married. So I humbly accept this honor as I recognize all the people who are also a part of this great adventure. Thank you.
Congratulations. Congratulations, Karol, Bow Bobko, and welcome to the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. You know, Jeff Hoffman was telling me the story today. Can you imagine they're coming in on landing and Hoffman saying, you know, the flight's over, this is great, no problems, we're back on Earth, and then all of a sudden, boom! And the landing gear blows. It's like, you know, and the eyes go, ooh, what happened here? But again, as he mentioned, cool as a cucumber, no problems, right, Karol? Our second inductee today is Lieutenant General Susan Helms. Helms has logged 5,064 hours in space and holds the world record for the longest spacewalk at 8 hours and 56 minutes. I got that right, right? She's a veteran of 5 space shuttle missions. From March to August 2001, Helms became the first woman to live and serve aboard the International Space Station as a member of the Expedition 2 crew. During that mission, Helms and her crew welcomed the first space tourist after a 12-year career with NASA that included 211 days in space. Helms returned to the United States Air Force in July 2002. In January of 2011, she became commander of the Joint Functional Component Command for Space and 14th Air Force. Let's take a look now at some highlights of her career.
Susan Helms on the left, Jim Voss on the right, soon to become space station crew members.
Hey, get my bridge, go to the airlock.
Main gear touchdown.
To present Susan Helms for induction into the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame, please welcome Hall of Fame astronaut and NASA Administrator Charles Bolden.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Welcome. Probably the happiest person here right now, at least based on the look on his face, is Susan's dad over there. It's incredible watching him as we go through this ceremony. It's an incredible honor for me this afternoon to introduce to you one of my heroes, Lieutenant General Susan J. Helms, United States Air Force. John's already told you much about her official Air Force and NASA careers. Selected by NASA in January 1990, Susan became an astronaut in July 1991. She flew on STS-54 in 93, STS-64, 1994, STS-78, 1998, STS-101, 2000, and served aboard the International Space Station as a member of the ISS Expedition 2 crew in 2001. A veteran of 5 flights, she's logged over 5,000 hours in space, including a world record EVA of 8 hours and 56 minutes, as John just talked about. Her incredible talent and leadership ability became quite evident to me during her first flight, STS-54, on which she served as an IV or intervehicular crew member with responsibility for overseeing the conduct of the spacewalk on that flight. Having trained as an IV crewman myself, I watched in awe as she set the standard for IV crew members by the manner in which she perfectly and deftly choreographed the spacewalk. Under her direction, we learned many lessons that would later prove key to construction of the International Space Station. But enough of the technical side of Susan. Let me share with you some of the jewels of her life from family and friends. Susan enjoys piano and other musical activities, jogging, traveling, reading, computers, and cooking. Although Susan will tell you she doesn't have time to cook anymore. I remember when she checked into the astronaut office. She joined the band Max Q, singing lead vocals and playing keyboard. And I'll have to tell you, for anyone who's ever heard Max Q, her addition to the band really helped bring them into the realm of playing real music. Susan is one of 4 sisters, daughters to retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Pat and Dory Helms, who reside in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The Hall of Fame class of 2001 is not only an all-Air Force class, in case you didn't notice it, but it consists of 2 members who can claim firsts from the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Bow Bobko, as you've already heard, was a member of the first graduating class of the Academy in 1959. And Susan was one of 97 women to survive from a class of 157 women to graduate from the U.S. Air Force Academy in 1980, the first class to ever graduate women from the Academy. According to her mom and dad, Dory and Pat Helms, and this is a quote, Susan is the oldest of 4 daughters and was well-behaved, quiet child. She taught herself to read early, and Dory says, I think the Dr. Seuss books and other books that were being read to her helped. But she was 6 when I first took her to a public library. I remember her standing in the middle of a room full of books and asking me 2 questions. How many books may I take home? And when I've read all the books in this room, may I start over? As a teenager, her main extracurricular interests were in the music field. Susan was a percussionist in the band and a pianist for the swing choir. However, in the fall of her senior year, she read in the October 1975 Parade magazine that they had opened the U.S. Air Force Academy to women and decided she wanted to apply. It was okay with her mom and dad, though somewhat of a surprise. She had the grades and the leadership skill, but according to them, she really wasn't a jock. She just told us, or told them, that she would need to get in shape, and that she did. Her father, Pat, who took on the task, recalls that her first mile of running took 16 minutes. That's pretty good for me. I don't know about the rest of you. I would love to have a 16-minute mile today. But when the time arrived for the necessary physical test in January, she was doing an 8-minute mile, and that day did her first ever pull-up. Hearing this story of Susan's conditioning makes it easier for me to understand the story told to me by her sister Nancy. As the story goes, and this is a quote, while visiting our family in 2004 or 2005, Susan asked if we minded if she took our dog, a beagle named Radar, then 6 years old, out for a jog. Of course we agreed. My husband and I laughed and laughed while they were gone about whether Susan would be able to keep up with the dog. About 40 minutes later, Susan and Radar returned from their run, and we asked how it went. In typical Susan fashion, she said, fine. Well, apparently Radar had a different story. He returned from the run and lay down on his bed. Radar didn't get up for 2 days. We had no idea that Susan was so fit. She outran the dog. Now, I personally love this story of Radar, and I must admit that it ended much, much better than I ever imagined as I was reading it, because every time I knew Susan, she was always in really good shape. And so while we were in the astronaut office together, as I was reading the story, I expected to read that Susan would return holding the dog's dying body in her arms after she had run it into the ground. The good thing is, the story ended a lot better than that. Susan, with Mother's Day coming up tomorrow, your mom wanted me to add how special it was when you once wished her Happy Mother's Day from space. She also says, I'll cry here. She also says one of the biggest surprises of her life was during your spacewalk on March 11th, 2001, when you paused and wished a happy 68th birthday. In her words, and I quote, "Doesn't get any better than that." Susan continues to amaze us, and we love her dearly. Sister Margie Helms Carish also reflects on what a very talented musician you are. She told me of the day when you were kids and your dad took the four girls to the movie Young Frankenstein. When we came home, Susan sat down at the piano and started to play the music from the movie by ear. I thought to myself, that's just not normal. She was also the piano player in the Debonaires, her high school musical ensemble, and she loves the show Glee. Also, Susan, Janet, Nancy, and I are very close, and in some combination have traveled quite a bit together over the years. Many trips to Las Vegas without the husbands and kids, several trips to meet in Paris, lots of trips to New York City, but the first trips were with my parents, traveling across the United States as Dad went to helicopter training before his time in Vietnam. Dory, you'll need to tell Margie that he was actually going to B-52 training. Just a little difference. Margie continues, we took our big green station wagon and drove from Massachusetts to California, stayed 4 months, and returned. We have many family memories along the way. Sister Nancy Stutzman tells of the time Susan was living on the ISS when Dennis Tito, the first space tourist that you've already heard about, was preparing to go to space. There's quite a bit of political commentary about it down here on Earth as to whether it was a good idea. Should the Russians be allowed to sell seats on the Soyuz? It was all over the news. Nancy says Susan was on station, and so she didn't have access to the plethora of news commentary. So she asked her how she felt about Dennis Tito coming to space. Nancy says she'll never forget. Susan said, while I'm living on the space station, if anybody knocks at the door, we're inviting them in. Sister Janet Helms Hansen reflects, and this is a quote, I just want to emphasize how much as a family we enjoy each other. My parents instilled in us at a very young age how important family is. We have all made an effort throughout the years to be at Susan's many accomplishments. However, on the flip side, Susan has also made efforts to be at our accomplishments as well. She's a wonderful sister and a wonderful friend. There's a saying that you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. I think all of us would choose each other as friends and family. From talking with your family members, Susan, one thing is very, very clear. They all brag how amazing a person you are. Most of all, how amazing you make them all feel they are to you. I'll just share a few more thoughts before I sit down from one of your dear friends, Lisa Reed, who has to take credit for training both of us. Lisa is here to celebrate with you and your family this very special weekend. And according to Lisa, Susan was a standout, even as a new astronaut candidate. That's the term. And she had this reputation for coming into training, having done all her prep work or homework, and came to and I'm going to give you some acronyms here, okay? The SST, SMS, SES, and MDF. That's the Single System Trainer, Shuttle Mission Simulator, Shuttle Engineering Simulator, and the Manipulator Development Facility. Did I get them right? Woo-hoo! She always came into those sessions armed with knowledge and lots of pointed questions. The instructors appreciated her preparation, but many times we were the ones who left with crew questions to answer and get back to her. So it's fair to say that while she was a student, her instructors ended up learning more from all the questions they researched. Susan spent years off and on traveling to Russia to train for ISS mission and learning Russian language. Many people never saw her dedication to preparation for this mission. The Expedition 2 training schedule was fully packed with little room for studying Russian. She would set the alarm and get up at 3:30 to get her Russian language study time in. By the time she flew, she was pretty fluent. Lisa also relates that Susan loved her time on the ISS, but being a rabid X-File fan, she fretted over how she was going to get to see the episodes she would be missing weekly while on board. Luckily for her, her support team was able to record them, And when either a shuttle or a Progress mission was there, she relished the chance to watch all the episodes at once and then trade emails with her X-File friends watching on Earth. This past January 2011, as John has already said, Susan Helms was promoted to Lieutenant General and assumed duties as Commander, 14th Air Force Space Command, and Commander, Joint Functional Component Command for Space, U.S. Strategic Command. With this milestone in her life, this daughter of a career Air Force pilot, Lieutenant General Helms became the first woman and astronaut to take command at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and privilege to present my hero and my friend, Lieutenant General Susan Helms.
And now the presentation of the Hall of Fame medal.
Boy, Charlie, you really got to me there. That is some real research. And you all don't know this, but there's a television that's behind this table up front, and we can see what you're seeing on the forward screens. And I know my hair is all over the place. But then I thought, in space it was all over the place anyway, so it's probably appropriate. I just can't control it. But in any case, I'm going to take a page from Bill's book. Bill said that it takes thousands to build a space shuttle program, and I'm going to tell you that it takes thousands to build an astronaut. And so all I want to do here, because there's not much more to say, is to just thank the people that basically got me here in this point of recognition, which, by the way, I'm so very thankful to the foundation and the committee for picking me for this. It truly is a humbling honor, and I admire all of you so very much. It is quite surreal to stand up here among these giants on the stage and the others who are part of them that aren't here today, and to be welcomed into this. It is kind of a speechless moment, really, and I want to thank all of you. It's upon your shoulders, of course, that we are all standing in this younger generation I'm a part of, but we would not be where we are today in space without all of you doing what you have done. So please, a round of applause for all of you. And that was my first thank you. I will give you my next one. I will name a couple of names. When I was a kid, I loved math and science, and I loved the Air Force. And of course, you're all probably wondering, joining the Air Force probably wasn't, it was a no-brainer, but the question was, what about the astronaut part? And so I would like to thank Dick Covey, who isn't here today, but when you think of who it was that probably got me really sparked to go ahead and put my application in for the program, it was him. He actually came up to me and said, why don't you apply to the program? And that, until that moment, till he said that, I didn't ever think I would be competitive for the program. And so because of him, I really did get incentivized to go ahead and submit my application. And little known to me, he was on the selection board. When I showed up a few months later, he was one of 12. He didn't have the only vote, but Charlie, you were on that selection board too, if I recall. It was a fun experience, but really, Dick was the one that sort of got this ball rolling. And when we showed up, the senior astronauts, by that time there were a few folks left from the Apollo program, but they were primarily the shuttle astronauts at the time I got there in 1990, and I have to thank them. They set basically a standard of excellence in all that we do, and nowhere was that more evident in how they tried to mentor us younger astronauts as we got ready for the shuttle flights than to think back on my rookie flight with my crew members who are all not rookies, one of whom is here today, Don McMonagle. And if any of you know Don McMonagle, you'll know that he is a man of perfection and knows what the standard really is in order to do this kind of business. And so all of the astronauts who were in the office mentoring us new folks, and Don, you and the rest of the folks on 54 that mentored me on, that's what really drove me to come into the training team and ask all those hard questions, was the astronauts behind me on my crew saying, this is the level you have to know things. And now let's see if you can figure out if the training team knows them too. So it was a great dynamic to be a part of. The training teams, I'll mention them. They're part of the thousands it takes to build an astronaut. You already heard that Lisa Reed is here today. There are other folks, I'm sure, in the audience that are here today. The training teams, very thankless job. They're dealing with the astronaut prima donnas that we are. Everybody thinks it's all about us. It's not. It's about the program and it's about the great adventure. But the reason that we look so good at what we do is because we were trained that way. And so the folks who do all of the payload integration, all of the work with us to interface to the space shuttle, all of the training for us, they're the ones that do build us into what we are and make us look good. And so I want to thank all of the folks who were a part of that. I do have to throw in a thank you to Hoot Gibson. He's the one that really was the impetus of me joining Max Q. And so Hoot, now I know why. He thought it would raise the level of the band, and that was what mattered. But he was definitely with the other Max Q band members, and including Carl Waltz, my dear friend. Basically, they showed what it meant to not only work hard, but to play hard. And so I think Max Q was one of those things in the astronaut band where that was our way of, after working so very hard, we just got together and we played music together, and that was playing hard too. And the byproduct that we were actually able to book a few gigs was a neat byproduct. But when I look back on it, I think that when you're an all-astronaut band, everybody's going to tell you you're playing pretty good. And so I always wondered about that after, but it was a great thing to be a part of, and of course Hoot had a hand in that as well as the others. And then I do have to mention Bob Cabana, because after flying several flights, the office does the flight assignments, and then this moment came where I was no longer a part of a mature program at that point in the 90s called the Space Shuttle. But me and a few others were basically identified by Bob Cabana, who was chief of the office at that time, to go do what astronauts need to do at times, which is to go and start up a new space program. A lot of the folks you see here, they were part of the early days of the shuttle program and the moon program, and in Scott's case, even earlier. And me and a few others were selected to be a part of the space station program, and Bob made that choice. And at the time, we didn't know it, but I've told him this since. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever had the chance to do, which was to be a part of a space outpost in space. That truly was a human adventure that has no equal. And I want to thank Bob for making that decision to put me and a few others in that position. We worked hard to get that program stood up and operating in the right way, and I think we succeeded. But that leads to my final thank yous, and that's those folks that I basically flew with, all of the crew members that I flew with. I drew more from them than they ever drew from me. And frankly, I think the reason I'm standing here before you right now is because of all the love and support of the fellow members of my flights that I flew with, and the teams that basically made us all become as good as we were. And then there's, of course, one obvious thank you I haven't mentioned yet, and that's my family. I'm debating whether to thank them now after what Charlie said, but but the bottom line is everything that they've said has been bringing me to tears just thinking about it. But it is true what he said, certainly, which is that my family means everything to me. My mom, my dad, my 3 sisters, and all of my extended family. And that when I was on space station, those many months, and I remember thinking, I've got to be in one of the most amazing places a human being can ever be. and this really grand adventure, looking at Earth, which is so very, very beautiful from afar. It hit me at that point that if you don't have family and keep tied to family, it really doesn't mean all that much. And so I want to thank my family always for being there and supporting me, because truly I'm who I am because of who you are. So thank you very much. And again, thanks very much to the committee and the foundation for honoring me. It truly is a humbling moment for me, and nothing, in the bottom of my heart, nothing will surely be able to be said that tells you how much this means. Thank you.
Congratulations, Susan Helms, and welcome to the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to present to you the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame Class of 2011, Karol Bow Bobko and Susan Helms. And now all the members of the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. It's your photo op time. As you're taking your pictures, it has been my pleasure to be with you today. And on behalf of the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex and the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, thank you for joining us for this historic ceremony. Please remain standing as the Hall of Fame astronauts finish these pictures and then make their grand exit.